This is the S2G podcast, where we share conversations that help us understand how to scale the food, agriculture, oceans, and energy transitions. I'm your host, Tanya Backritzes. In this episode, we unpack the elements of a good story that can inspire action with none other than Kaitlin Yarnall, Chief Storytelling Officer at National Geographic. As a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investor or potential investor in any investment vehicle sponsored by S2G. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Specific companies mentioned in this podcast are for educational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement of any kind. Please note that S2G may maintain investments in some of the companies discussed on this podcast. For more important information, please see s2gventures.com/disclosures.
I still believe, and I have to believe, and the second I stop believing this, you should remove me from my job, that stories can persuade, and stories make a difference, and stories can move.
It seems we need storytelling now more than ever. The scale of the challenges we are facing will require all hands on deck. We need tools to help us overcome seemingly unsurmountable societal divisions and party lines. We need ways to communicate that cut past labels and rhetoric. We need to become better storytellers. Storytelling has become a sort of buzzword in the last few years, but when Kaitlin Yarnall was offered the position of Chief Storyteller at National Geographic, she had no idea that such a role even existed. Since then, Kaitlin and her peers at Nat Geo have shaped the way we now see storytelling as a necessary tool to achieve any company, organization, or movement's objectives. Most people know National Geographic as a source of awe-inspiring visuals and tales from the tallest mountain peaks to the deepest ocean depths. But their work is about more than just showcasing beautiful places and cute animals. National Geographic uses storytelling to protect endangered landscapes and species, inform about scientific breakthroughs, and inspire people not just to care, but to act. At S2G, we believe that storytelling is one of the key ingredients for enabling the climate transition. But telling stories about climate is really hard. It's hard for it not to seem hopeless, to not make people want to turn away. It can also be really difficult to make information about complex science and technology approachable and compelling. Our entrepreneurs working on climate solutions have the challenge of communicating about all these topics in a way that brings investors, partners, and customers on board. In this episode, Sanjeev Krishnan speaks with Kaitlin about the science behind storytelling and which emotions inspire a long-term positive response. She shares how to translate data and science into something more digestible. She talks about the importance of zeroing in on your audience and how targeting each audience differently can magnify your impact. Whether you're an entrepreneur, policymaker, corporate, or investor, this exploration into the art and science of storytelling can change the way you communicate with your audience and build community around shared objectives.
Kaitlin, thank you so much for joining us today on the S2G podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I think the last time we talked, we were having margaritas during Climate Week, if I remember.
And tacos.
And tacos, yeah. And we were talking about good storytellers and the power of storytelling. And maybe as we get into this, did you think you'd be the Chief Storytelling Officer of National Geographic? So tell me your story of how you got to be the Chief Storytelling Officer of National Geographic.
Sure. Did you like how I didn't even let you finish the sentence? It was such not an idea for me. Truth of the matter is I didn't know what I wanted to be. I grew up in rural Northern California and I like to be outside and I like to hang out with animals and travel and really had no clue what I wanted to be. I was a Latin American literature major in college and stumbled into a geography class, stumbled into a cartography lab, liked that a lot. It was a connection of like my right brain, left brain, the math and the art. What I didn't know then was it was a way to transmit information and tell stories. I didn't have those words at that point. Fast forward, National Geographic was hiring cartographers to work on a big World Atlas edition. I started as an intern here. There's a lot of steps in the story I'm going to skip over here, but basically started as a cartographer, worked on maps a lot, made the big pull-out maps in the magazine, and then had various leadership positions in the magazine, from art director, creative director, executive editor, worked into that. And then at some point, we were really trying to establish, how do we do storytelling in a nonprofit space at National Geographic Society? So our CEO asked me if I'd come figure that out. And that's how it evolved. And I am the first chief storytelling officer at the society. So not only did I not know what I wanted to be or what I was going to do, I never thought I'd be here 20 years. I didn't know it was a position that one could have because it didn't exist. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey, 20 years here of figuring out what storytelling really means to me.
And why did they create this? Did you create it, or did they ask you to do it?
They asked me to, they gave me the position. The title came out of the fact that we had a chief scientist, and we wanted to really hold National Geographic in this space where science is our foundation, storytelling is our superpower. How do we give those two really huge buckets of work weight equal weight and position within an HR world? And so that's how it happened. I will say that when the position first came, it was funny because people didn't know what to make of it. They were like, do you read bedtime stories to kids? Like, storytelling was not a thing in the zeitgeist like it is today.
I'm going to ask a meta question, because I think you talked about it at our summit. What emotions actually stick with humans, and why? Give me the science behind storytelling, because I think you do that in a pretty unique way.
Yeah. Like I said before, storytelling is really buzzy right now, yet it's really nothing new. I want to demystify that a little bit. Storytelling is what makes jokes funny. It's what makes people popular at cocktail parties, right? It's how we put our kids to bed. It's how we remember our history. And there has been a lot of research done on messaging and communication and what makes people act. But it's been done in the past much more in an advertising framework, right? And so what's been interesting recently is, okay, how do you take some of that really deep bench of knowledge that makes people buy things, coupled with what's that deep bench of knowledge we can pull from, say, the public health sector? Why did people stop smoking? Why did people start wearing seatbelts? Why can we now talk about condoms freely and openly? What is all that messaging? And how do we apply that to storytelling writ large, and then use it for more impact-driven storytelling in the changes we seek to create in the world? In terms of emotions and storytelling, there's been some really interesting research coming out of the University of Florida about which emotions drive people to action. It's fascinating because if you think about the traditional infomercials of, like, for X amount of dollars a day, you could save X, or the awful PETA videos that make you want to turn away, those are playing into fear, shame, anger. That gets a really quick hit in your brain, and it activates our fight or flight system, nervous system. And so you might get a really fast reaction from someone who might give you a one-time donation, or they turn the channel off, but they don't want to sit with it. So when we think about actual making impact with storytelling, the emotions that people want to sit with and that ultimately drive them to think differently and act differently they're fascinating. Parental love. And what I love about that body of research is that it does not matter if you're a parent. We all, at some point, felt parental love. So parental love, awe, and wonder. There's a whole bunch of research right now, a lot coming out of Berkeley about awe and wonder being a distinct emotion. We used to lump it in with good things and other emotions, but it is a distinct part of our brain that lights up. I recently was talking to someone about this who said it's like the umami of emotions, that, like, once we figured out that umami was its own taste, then you start to see it and you start to recognize it and you start to identify it. Awe and wonder is having that kind of moment. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about the awe and wonder research is that individually, awe and wonder moves us, but collective awe and wonder releases oxytocin in a group, which is bonding. That's the chemical that bonds mothers when they're nursing their babies, right? It's that kind of bonding chemical. So if you think about standing in front of Half Dome, that sense of awe and wonder you get, and then doing that with someone, It's an incredibly bonding experience. Think to the big cathedrals that you walk in Europe. Imagine you were living in the Dark Ages and you walked into that. And then you all sang together in that space. It's no wonder that religion got people to, in those ages, march together, because that awe and wonder was so bonding. The other emotion that really indexes high for people to make change and that we want to sit with it feels good is hope. And there's a lot of talk about false hope and it's a shallow emotion, but it's not. We want that. We need that. And so when I think about storytelling, because so much of storytelling, even in the most journalistic documentary sense, is selective.
Yeah.
Here's the character you're going to put forward. How do you begin and end your story? How do we pull into those emotions and put those straight forward? Even if you're doing journalism with a capital J, there's a lot of choice and subjectivity. And if you can over-index on those emotions and offer people hope and solutions, then they're going to sit with your content longer, right?
So parental love, awe and wonder, and hope. And visual, if I remember your speech at our summit, was how many times more powerful than audio?
Orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
We're primates, right?
Yep.
We have big eye sockets.
Yeah.
We evolved to scan the horizon for predators and prey, right? That is our physiology. And so because of that, our brains just process imagery much faster than any other sensory input, right? And it's much more universal, right? Because it is tapping into our physiology.
And obviously you have nature. I want to get back to that, but are there other things in visual that move people besides nature, or is sort of nature in the natural world just above anything else that sort of moves people and they stick with something?
People like to feel small, like not in a derogatory, like I don't have value, I don't have meaning, but that's what awe and wonder makes you feel like. And oftentimes nature is the way to do that.
Yeah.
Space sells for that reason, I think. People love outer space. I think part of it is because it makes you feel this sense of I'm just a speck of dust in this huge cosmos that we float around in. And so I think nature works, space works. Interesting with visuals is universality works, and storytelling in general is people want to identify with the characters, want to identify with the setting. It can't be so foreign that you can't put yourself in it. A photo editor I worked with years ago used to say, where's the heartbeat in that frame? And like a beautiful mountainscape is incredible, but if you put a person in it, not only does it give scale, but immediately you could be like, what does that person feel like standing there? What would it feel like to be there? It's that connection that sits.
And then on audio, say more about what moves people to hold as opposed to the fear-based.
I don't know as much about the science of it, but I will tell you that it's all the same. People want to feel comforted. They want to feel like somebody got them, that they're in charge, that it's going to be okay, that they're held in that.
Yeah.
They want to be inspired too. I years ago worked with an executive coach who told me charisma is the blend of strength and warmth. And I think that transmits a lot into voices and audio communication. People want to feel that, right? That blend of strength and warmth. I also think, particularly in creating narratives, music is really important.
Yeah.
Right? Because it cuts through language.
Yeah.
Babies dance before they walk. When they can't stand, they move to the rhythm, right? And that cuts across culture. We move to rhythm. We want it.
Let's talk about story and science, because science is rooted in data, typically.
Should be.
Evidence, in the scientific method. How do you translate science to storytelling?
Yeah, I think translating science to storytelling is vital. And I don't think it's done well enough.
Yeah.
I think that the trick is to not dumb it down, right? But yet to make it approachable, understandable to an average audience. I think for me, the elements of a good science story are the same elements of any good story. Who's a character, right? Oftentimes that is the scientist Now, if you are doing more social science or science that involves human subjects, that's often easier, or animals, put them at the front of it. A biologist has an easier time when they're working with a living being. A hard scientist, I'm like, you're the character. Tell me why you've devoted your life to this. Tell me why it matters. Or what is the future person that you've got in your head that this medical thing you're working on is going to impact in the future? So I think we need characters, and so many science stories leave characters out of it. I think we have to really be able to communicate scale. And there's tricks to that. We call it social math, which is basically, instead of a big number, you say it's 15 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It's to the moon and back. And I think that the human brain, we cannot comprehend big numbers. We just can't. So oftentimes big numbers just get thrown in there, or huge time scales. Yeah. And you're like, I don't get it, right? These are the things that turn audiences off.
Right.
There's no character. They don't understand the scale of it. They can't put themselves in it.
Yep.
Right? And then also, particularly around climate science, is world is dark right now in a lot of ways. How, without being Pollyanna, without greenwashing, how do we actually center some of this really important science in solutions? The editor-in-chief of the magazine I worked under for many years had this saying that I will never forget, where he said, you always have to balance wonder and worry. And I think about that all the time, because again, our jobs as storytellers is not to make everyone feel good.
Right.
Right. But if you turn people off, they're not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
So how do we, even in the hard science stories, balance that wonder and worry? And then the other thing I think that in a lot of science storytelling gets left out are the visuals.
Right.
Are the visuals. And again, the biologists have it easy. They got like charismatic megafauna. It's easy. Like, people care about a tiger because it's a mammal. It looks like us. But how do you tap into all those things we were talking about before, awe and wonder and beauty, and put that front and center in the science? And there's a way. You have got to get creative sometimes, and it doesn't necessarily mean photography. But how do you tap into that part of our physiology that people will stop and look at something visual? It could be an illustration. It could be a chart, but not a bad one. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. I want to go back to wonder and worry, because science is always evolving. When you storytell, how do you think about certainty and ambiguity of the science in the way you tell the story?
Personally, I don't think anything's certain. And if you understand the scientific method, you know that base physics is in question all the time. I think that you have to ground the audience enough. And this is what we know to be true. And this is the stuff at play.
Right.
You can't start every story you ever begin with, let's step back and say, we don't even know if gravity is real, because we do, right?
Yeah.
So I think you've got to ground in, this is what we know, this is where we are, and here's the exciting part. I think so many times scientists, and it's not their fault, the academy beats this out of them, but scientists lose that sense of what's the cool, exciting, fun thing? Yeah. What's the thing that you are trying to figure out?
Yeah.
And I think if we could reframe the scientific method through that lens of, it's a big mystery and it's a big puzzle, and we're all building off of each other, which we know that, but that sense of discovery, exploration, excitement is lost, right?
So there's a story, there's science, and then I want to go to audience. When you tell stories, how important is the audience, either culturally, like what part of the world they're in, or what their background is, or what their profession is? When you shape a story or tell a story, how much are you customizing to the audience?
The audience is everything.
Right.
The second a storyteller is telling a story without thinking about the audience first is bad. Like, they've lost it. Because in the same way you can tell if like filmmakers are making films for awards, you can tell, right? The audience has to be first and foremost. For me, anyone who's ever worked for me knows that when you come into my office, you want to pitch something, you have to say in the first sentence, purpose and audience. If you can't tell me the point of this and you can't tell me who it's for, go out and try again. Purpose and audience for everything. And I also say that the public is a nonsense audience. It does not exist. It does not exist.
Right.
If I could use stronger language, I would. What kind of public? We talking to kids? We're talking to grown-ups? talking to Americans. We're talking to North Americans. We're talking to Latinos in South Texas.
Yeah.
That's all the public, right? So part of that is there. And so there are times when I firmly believe that illumination for illumination's sake matters.
Right.
And that's okay. And sometimes we will talk about, we want to push this out. We want to go broad. We want people to know about it. So that's one level of this almost like social narrative change work. Then there is a much more targeted, like storytelling for policy change. And in that case, it becomes really interesting. Maybe we're making a film for one person. If the Minister of Environment of X country has the power to create the protected area that we want to create, let's make a film for her. Let's think about what's going to make her tick.
Are we getting more confirmation bias globally, or is it America? Because I feel like we're living in a world where you walk into a bias. And I guess that's maybe human nature. But given the advent of social media and just general segmentation of populations globally, can stories persuade or do stories confirm? Or is there a difference?
Well, that's a deep question. I want to believe that they persuade and they 100% confirm. Right? I think that we've always lived in our bubbles of confirmation bias, always. Yeah. It's just that now we have algorithms that push it into our pockets, right?
Right.
At great speed. And all this research we've talked about, the algorithms know how to target to super specific demographics that we traditionally couldn't do through any other channel. But I still believe, and I have to believe, and the second I stop believing this, you should remove me from my job, that stories can persuade, and stories make a difference, and stories can move.
Just related to maybe our audience, the way that we've looked at it, Kaitlin, is content community commerce versus climate solutions. And the content is really for us a thesis that one of our team members has or the entrepreneur or the management team has. They need to build community, either early adopter customers and then the middle and then hopefully more mainstream and mass. And that community is really important. And to get that community, you need content, and content is to us storytelling. And then the evolution of those two things should be commerce. How do you think you generate community in the 21st century, given that no one can do it alone? You need customers, or you need investors, or you need policymakers. You need a stakeholder base that wants to deploy whatever hope and solution that these great entrepreneurs and management teams have, and they want to scale them. How do you think about community formation with regard to your work?
Yeah, again, my tool is story. Right. And for me, it's what's the base narrative we can all rally around?
Right.
Be it myth or fact, or probably somewhere in between.
Right.
What is the thing that we hold to be true, that the story that we all want to rally around? And then how do we layer on that? So there's the base story that energy transition, here's what needs to happen. And we all are bought into that narrative. But then how do you keep layering on the surprising, delightful, solution-oriented stories that pull more people into the audience and keep them further engaged? And really, at the end of the day, it's no different that when you say to a friend in a social setting, hey, you got to hear about this. Right. Hey, you got to meet my friend. Hey, come over here, look at this. And it's building delightful stories on top of that base narrative that builds your community. And eventually, you've built that community that all are working within that same framework of these are the stories, this is the narrative, this is the thing that drives us forward.
Andrew Breitbart, a controversial figure for some, said something around culture is upstream from politics, and you have to really influence culture to influence politics. The controversy of climate and the science behind it gets challenged quite a bit. Is there a bridge? Is there a way to develop consensus in a culture that is divided, in a politique that is divided, specifically around this issue? How do you talk to audiences that have different frameworks for what they think is truth and not real?
Yeah, it's tricky, but I think that we have to try harder. I think in general, in the broadest sense, the climate environmental community has not tried hard enough.
Right.
And we've been speaking within ourselves. And I think we have to realize that polar bears don't move everyone. They
Right.
move some people very much.
Yeah.
I am such a fan of the Hip Hop Caucus and their work, because Rev Yearwood, who leads that group, really has said, I love the polar bears, that's great, but this is what works for my Black and brown communities within the US. And so they're rolling out comedy shows called Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave. We have to get better at the messaging and holding out that this is what we care about.
Yeah.
So I think, one, as a community, we need to do better.
Yeah.
And I think some of the ways you do that are, some is the medium, like I just talked about, but a lot of it, what I also reference, is the character.
Yeah.
And polar bears or Arctic scientists don't work for much of the world or even in the States. We have an example of some work we did with an explorer in Florida. His name is Carlton Ward, and he's been working to create a protected corridor for wildlife in the state for decades, probably. He's figured out that the way in for the environmental movement is the Florida panther, charismatic megafauna. That works with the environmental world. And lots of the wealthy donors come forward and say, yeah, I want to save the Florida panther. That's one way of creating the work. But at the end of the day, who has the power to protect that land was the Florida legislature.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked with Carlton to create a different narrative. The main character of the film was not Carlton, and it was not the panther.
Yeah.
It was Florida landowners and ranchers. And they were talking about the deep stewardship they feel towards the land and their sense of protecting it for generations past and generations forward. They use language like the creator endowed this, right? Very different language. Same footage, same story, same outcome. We screened it for the Florida legislature. Governor DeSantis signed the protection into law. We didn't lead with climate change. We didn't lead with the panther. We led with protecting the land and the heritage and the culture. But outcome's the same. And I think that's where we, the broad we, in terms of the community that's trying to communicate this work, have to get more agile and versatile. And we have to bring more people into the tent who don't think and act and look like us.
Yeah. I have a narrative that I want you to dispel around human nature, or maybe you agree with it. So the ego, I find, is a negotiation between your id and your superego. And your id is my job, my family, my livelihood, my life. And then the superego is the things you should do, and whether it's sources of spirituality, religion, your parents, your social mores and customs that you've observed and you think is the right. And I think often when we tell stories, particularly around these transitions and around climate, I think some people look at that and that's harming my id, and that's almost a stronger force than some of the superego dynamics. I don't think people necessarily always buy the superego stuff. They're like, I know I should be like not doing X, but I do it anyway.
I have no business ever eating a donut, and I'm going to. Like, I think there is the should.
Yeah.
I think doesn't actually work that well in human behavior, right? Like we can all pick 10 examples in our life, right? I should have gone to bed much earlier last night. I know I need to. I wasn't doing anything useful, right? I think, again, we haven't done a good enough job of saying how some of these actions that we need to take are actually going to make the id better too.
Right.
Right? It is going to make your job better.
Yeah.
It's going to make you a leader.
Yeah.
You're going to better be able to provide for your family. Not in the like, I need to create a better future for my grandchildren. And so I think, again, particularly my tribe of people too, where we don't like to tell those stories. We want to tell these stories because they're more majestic and you get to do the sweeping orchestra. But there are very real stories in the business world, in the business sense, that there is a case for this.
Right.
And this is what I love about what you all do, is that is what you're doing.
So we have an annual S2G summit for the audience, and we gather our portfolio companies, our corporate partners, our ecosystem partners, policy, NGOs, co-investors, a whole broad swath of folks. It's a long day. And Kaitlin, being in one of those long, back-to-back, high-content kind of days, it's always hard to go last, and you crushed it. I think you mesmerized people, and I'm grateful for you speaking. You're good at this, is I guess my point, and I've seen it, and I think our audience loved it. And it was a very broad audience. So who does this well? Who is as good as you at doing this in front of audiences?
A lot of people are better than me. But I will tell people what I say all the time when they're super flattering and thank you.
Yeah.
Is one, it's a muscle, right? Like any other thing, you practice it, and some people are better at it to begin with, but then there is a lot of practice. I also have the incredible gift of National Geographic visuals that I get to carry around with me, which doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
People who I think do it well, my gosh, most of our National Geographic photographers stun me on stage. And not just because they could honestly stand there and read the phone book and we would be stunned just by the imagery, but that's not what I mean.
Right.
I think that what they are doing is what makes them so good. One, we work with them, but two is that they've gone out, they've witnessed, they've seen, they've captured, they've brought back, they've distilled. And that whole process makes them such compelling messengers because they've had to do the hard work of finding the story, creating the story, synthesizing it, and then delivering it. So I think that makes, and then they've got like the world's best visuals behind them. So I think our photographers are incredible. When I work with people on public speaking, I tell them too, who do you like? Because some of it's personal preference.
Yeah.
And I say this to photographers who are trying to hone their visual vision too. What work do you like? Pick your medium. What film do you like? What photo do you like? What speeches do you like? Watch them critically and try to tell me why. Why do you like it? And I don't think we often do that critical analysis, particularly since you left like a lit class or something, to sit back and be like, why does this thing, be it an interview, a film, a piece of writing, a photo, why do I like it? Because it's all subjective.
So our community's entrepreneurs, management teams, they're building hopefully solutions, co-investors, corporates, policy stakeholders. I'm always at their grit, at their imagination, at their execution. I'm always awed by what they do. But I do think that distillation is hard because a lot of them, what they're doing is, it's hard to synthesize easily. So maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice you'd have for them in terms of how they tell their business story or their investment story.
Yeah, I'd say 1, think about someone you want to tell a story to who you really care about, who you think is smart, but who is so far outside of your world. So for me, it would be like one of my great aunts. And that's who I always used to hold in my head, is smart, so far out of my world. But I'm not talking down to her, right? So I'd pick the hypothetical or real audience member and try to think about honing a story for them. Number 2, I would say, don't be afraid to have a little fun, right? The work we're doing is not half funny,
right?
But there is humor, and there is lightness, and there is delight, and there is surprise. And I don't feel good when I speak if I don't get a laugh out of the audience.
Yeah.
And I'm not up here telling jokes, right? But I would encourage your community. And I sat through the S2G summit and I learned a lot. And that was one of the things I thought where, like, my favorite moments was when there was a collective chuckle or a sigh, because we need that, right? Particularly when you're working in really high stakes work. Yeah. So I would say, don't shy away from that. And that can be talking about your failures. It can be talking about how you don't know how to communicate it. We take ourselves a little too seriously.
Yeah.
And then the third one would be like, find the visuals. They exist. Work at it. Ask someone for help. Phone a friend. Find a visual.
Those are all great pieces of advice. Thank you, Kaitlin, for joining us. Hopefully you enjoyed the discussion. I loved it. I learned so much, as always. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We certainly learned so much from Kaitlin about communicating the work we do at S2G. We will continue to tell stories that build a community around climate innovation, bring more people into the dialogue, and hopefully move them to action. Thank you for tuning in to the S2G podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2gventures.com.